Alrighty, so this is a tutorial that covers off the absolute basics of Blender. So how you can get a handful of shapes or forms, customize them, add some colors and some shading, and then export that as a rendered image file. There is so much more that you can do, and we're going to expand on that a lot more in the next set of videos, but hopefully this will just get that ball rolling with the basics. Now, as you can see, we've opened up Blender. You will have just obviously installed this. The first thing that you're going to see is this little window here, which asks you to, what you'd like to start by doing. You're almost always going to click on this general button here. It's the best place to start. So we'll click there. And of course, you're then presented with this cube. There's not much you can do with the cube. You don't really know how to pick it up or move it or reshape it or color it. So it can be pretty daunting in that early stage. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to give you the basics about moving around the screen. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can do this depending on whether you have a mouse or whether you're working with a laptop. If you're working with a laptop, you can use your two fingers on your touchpad, and you can kind of see how you can move about the screen there. You can also pinch in, pinch out. With a mouse, you're using the scroll wheel to zoom in and out, and you can click down on your scroll wheel to rotate. There's also a bunch of tools over here that you can use. So this tool here you can use to rotate. That's called a gimbal. You can click and drag your magnifying glass up and down. And we've also got this, which is kind of a pan. So you can sort of see there. If you're looking to do the pan there, you can hold down Shift and your scroll wheel. So that's how you can do your pan. You're less likely to use that pan. So that's moving about. Now, what do you want to do with this box? We want to start editing the box. So we've got a series of hotkeys that we need to learn. Now, there are 6 buttons which are going to get you 90% through everything you need to know with Blender. And they are G, R, and S, and then X, Y, and Z. So if you're going to take anything from this segment, remember those 6 buttons. So I'm going to go through G for now. G stands for grab. Now, if I hit the G button, the box is going to follow my mouse. So you can see I'm just moving my mouse about, the box is following it. If I hit the R button, the box is going to rotate following my mouse. So you can see that. And then I hit escape. And if I hit the S button, the box is going to scale or stretch as I move my mouse. I'll hit escape to escape that. Now comes the X, Y, and Z. Now, if you've ever worked with graphs before, you'd probably know the X, Y, and Z reference axes. So what you're going to want to do is, if you want to move it forward and backwards along this red axis, you're going to hit the G button, and then you're going to hit the X button. Now that locks it in place. Now that's really important to do when you're working spatially, because if you just hit G and you move it anywhere, it might look great from where you're seeing it, but if you kind of move about the screen, it's actually kind of moved it back a bit, and it can be a little bit difficult to get your head around where it's moving it to. So it's really important to lock it to axes. So G, X moves it that way. G, Y will of course move it along the green line, or sideways I suppose. And Z will move you up and down. Same goes for the R button and for the S. So R and X, you'll see it spinning as though the axle is running along that red axis there. And same with R and Y and R and Z. Ooh, R and Z. Same goes with scale or stretch. S and X will stretch it proportionally along the X. Same goes with the Y. Same goes with the Z. Now that covers off a lot of what you need to do in Blender. Everything's kind of a derivative of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to now go into editing the box. So that's all great and well if you just want a regular rectangular prism and being able to move about that. Not many people really want to stop there though. So let's go into editing the box. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hit the tab button. And you can see when we've hit the tab button, we've got a whole bunch of tools have arrived there. This has changed from object mode to edit mode, and our box all of a sudden has these little nodes that you can grab. Now the main thing that you're going to want to take from this edit mode is these little features over here. So you can grab your little buttons or your little points or nodes, whatever you want to call them. So you can grab them at an individual level. And then from there I can G and X or Y or Z and move up and down those little nodes, G, X, Y, and Z. So now you're starting to manipulate the form of your box. So we'll go out of that and I'm just going to undo. The R button, you can't actually rotate these dots because they're only dots. We can only move into rotate or scale for that matter when we move into these lines. So the lines are the next component. So the dots are those individual dots. The lines, we're going to grab a line here and it's the same deal again. G and X to slide it along that X-axis, Y to slide it along the Y-axis or sideways, and Z is for that up and down. So that's your grab. Your rotate is same again. So R and Y, you can rotate it along that axis. So if I was to kind of zoom in and move a bit there, R and Y, you can kind of see how that's rotating our box and the box is kind of dancing. Because this box runs along the Y-axis, oops, R and X, runs along the X-axis, I can't actually rotate it along that X-axis, so I can only rotate along the Z-axis like so, or the Y-axis. So basically that's it. So you're rotating along, and you can see how that's manipulating the little box there. So you've got your R, X, Y, and Z. Next one is your face select. So here we can grab, that's just a free grab, or you can hit the X button, the Y button, or the Z button, and you can start to move, edit your box there. Now that all goes the same with scale as well. I can grab a line, I can hit scale, and you can see that that's stretching my line. Oops, that's stretching it a lot. S, and you can kind of just drag your mouse away to scale. S and X to keep it locked in. So that again, it's just that G, R, and S for grab, scale, and rotate, or grab, rotate, and scale, and then followed by those coordinates X, Y, or Z. So let's just go back now. We'll do a couple more things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this box now, because that's all great and well if you just want this six-sided object, but I want to split it now. So I'm going to back into that edit mode. Now this is a really interesting tool that you're going to use probably quite a lot. It's this loop cut. So what it does is you can see I've clicked on it and I can hover over now the box, click on that, and perhaps even click on that, and all of a sudden we've actually got much more faces to work with, which is going to make sense in a second. If I was to now grab a line here and G and Z, you can see that we're starting to formulate some much more complex shapes, G and Z. You can kind of see how that's going to translate later. If I was to want to perhaps grab both of these, both of them, G and Z, we've got ourselves a house shape. So that's your first tool there. The second one after that, after you've made your loops cuts, is your little face tool here, or your extrude region. Now you're going to want to make sure that you're in face mode, and you'll grab yourself a face and you can basically just pull it out. So you can kind of imagine the application for that. All right, so we're going to bring that back to just a cube now. So just get used to those. So we've got, once again, I keep I'm sounding like a broken record a bit, but you've got your G for grab, you've got your R for rotate, you've got your S for scale, and then you've got X, Y, and Z to choose which axes. And then you've got your loop cut to make slices in your object, and then your extrude to grab individual faces and pull them out. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going back into object mode now, and we want to add another box and perhaps a ground for the box to go on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now hit Shift A, and you can see that brings up this box here. You're going to want to add a mesh. So I'm going to start by adding the ground, which is going to be in the form of a plane. So that puts a plane there. I can just hit the S button, and let's make that plane quite large. I'm going to G and Z to get my box to sit on top of that plane. And now what I might want to do is I'm going to hit Shift A again, and I'm going to add, let's just say, a cylinder. G and Y to grab and pull along the Y axis. S to scale it down. G and Z to bring it up a bit. And then I'm just going to G and Y to sit it right next to that box again. So that's how you add new boxes. You're always doing that in object mode, and you can see you've got your plane now and you've got your two boxes. I'm just going to move that across a bit because it's kind of overlapping. So that's effectively it. Most of your objects are going to just be a combination of a few of these boxes or a few of these different forms. So once we do that, we're going to need to go into coloring and shading. It's all great and well that we've got these forms down pat, but we want to move into some coloring and some shading now. So what I'm going to do firstly to get to here is I'm going to click over here. So these are all your different viewing modes. You've got your wireframe, which is just the black outlines. You've got your basic shader, which is where we've been working from. You've got your colored shader, which is kind of a nice intermediate, but the one that we want to look at now is this viewport shading mode. And you can see now that all of a sudden it's applying these lighting effects. And this little dot over here, you'll realize is actually a light. And this, you'll realize, is actually a camera. If we were to click the little camera button here, you can see that's our viewing area, everything inside that yellow box. So this is when you're starting to move into that editing mode. So what I'm going to do now is we want to move from Eevee, which is this current renderer, to something called Cycles. Now, that probably won't make a lot of sense for you at the moment, so you might just want to follow directly what I'm doing. Clicking on Render Properties here, this little camera over here, Render Engine, and you're going to change that to Cycles. And you can see how much better quality the render is now. Now, one more thing that we're going to do is, before we start coloring, is I'm going to click on my little, I clicked on a little arrow over here, which brought about this. Actually, I'm going to close that up and do it again so you're aware of it. This little sneaky arrow here. Clicking on View and Lock Camera to View. So what that does is we're looking through the camera's eyes now, and I'm just going to move about and set the camera up so that it's rendering my box all nicely. And then I'll just close that back up again. All right, now we have that camera mode and we're ready to start adding in some colors. To add some colors, you're going down here. So this is your material properties. So your basic material now, which everything's colored in, is just a white. So it's just got this white. You can rename this if you like, white, or we're going to change it to red anyway, so I'm just going to call it red. And now the easiest thing to do is your base color down here. You're just going to click on that and you're just going to drag that down to be red. Pretty straightforward so far. Might want to, with this one, I'm going to click New, and I'm just going to change that to yellow, and I'm just going to change that base color there to a yellow. So that's all pretty straightforward. So you've got your little red and you've got your yellow. Now we're going to move on to a little bit more interesting stuff. I'm going to grab this ground here and I'm going to click New. But instead of changing the color, I want to make it reflective. So if this was a product render, you'd want a really nice reflective ground to kind of sit on and make it look like a professional photo. So in my material here, let's just rename that reflective. I'm just double clicking on that for the sake of exercise there. And I'm going to go down to metallic and I'm going to drag that all the way across, and you can see that that's starting to reflect its environment. If I drop down the roughness here, you can see that that reflection's becoming quite sharp. So that's a really sharp reflection, much too sharp really, but you can probably just sort of drop that down and you've got that kind of reflectiveness. So that's effectively it for that. So you've got your reflective surface. Now imagine that you want to do individual faces. So you've got this, imagine you've got this cylinder here and you want to maybe just turn it into a red and yellow striped cylinder. So we're going to go into Object Edit mode again, or hit the Tab button to do that. I'm going to select my faces. So I'm just selecting these, holding Shift to select multiples of them. Now we're going to do some tricky stuff. I'm going to scroll up here. I'm going to hit the little plus button. And then I'm going to click Assign. And then I'm going to click Red. So you can see now that we've got this red and yellow stripe happening here. So that's those individual faces. So if we was to do the same with the cube here, I'm going into edit mode, clicking tab. I'm clicking on this face here. I'm clicking the plus button. I'm clicking assign, and then I'm selecting the color that I want to assign to it. So that's effectively it. Now finally, we're going to move into exporting this. So you've created this, it's a really nice image. We want to export this as an image, which you could perhaps drag into your poster design or whatever you want to do. So pretty straightforward, but there's a few steps involved. So you do need to make sure that you follow them periodically. So first thing is we're going to go into this camera mode here. There's a bunch of stuff over here that you can look at. If your design's really complex, you're going to want to care about whether you're using the CPU or the GPU to compute. If you're keeping your images pretty basic, which I recommend you do for the meantime, that stuff shouldn't matter too much, but it is something that you will need to learn eventually. The main thing that you're really going to want to learn in the short term is this maximum samples here. This will slow down your rendering time massively, so you want to reduce that down to even just 128, which is perfectly fine. It will give you a pretty nice quality render, unless you're doing a super finished presentation and you really, really care about the quality. Drop it down to 128. That's going to render out all pretty nice and easily. Other than that, there's a few different things. You can click on this little printer button here. You can affect your resolution. So at the moment, it's 1920 by 1080, which is just your high definition resolution. Happy to keep it like that. So once you've done all of that, let's just hit the render mode. So I'm clicking render up the top here, and I'm just going to click render image. And we can see that that's already brought about that. You can see those samples, how slowly they're moving. If you remember back, that was over 4,000, how long your render would take if you kept it at that. So yeah, dropping it down to 128 is reasonably accurate, and you can kind of see the quality is pretty good. So as it goes through these samples, these little dots continue to clear up and get better and better. And then once it gets to those 128, which is going to happen in a sec, it'll do a bit of a wash of it with your noise, and you can see that you've got these really nice, clean renders like so. Now, from here, you're just going to want to go Image, Save As, and then just save that onto your desktop or wherever. So that marks the end of this Blender lesson. Hopefully you can imagine all of the amazing things you can do just with these really, really simple tools. G, R, and S, grab, scale or stretch, and rotate. X, Y, and Z, and then that tab button to go into edit mode, or flick between edit and object mode, and then those little things that you can do with your materials to simply just change the color or the reflectiveness of your object. Spit yourself out a render like that, and you're ready to move on to the next much more complex and sophisticated stage.